I'm experimenting with different angles. Apparently, I've been told my nose will appear less enormous from a higher angle. I don't know. Some problems just can't be fixed. What can I tell you? Student loans. Student loans, people ask about this. I did mention in a previous video something about student loans getting special privileges. So when I was referring to student loans, I was referring to government student loans. In this case, we're in Ontario, so OSAP. Most of the other provinces, to the best of my knowledge, follow a similar pattern. There are some exceptions, I think, in Quebec and one of the Atlantic provinces, but I can't really recall. I don't deal with it very often, but I do deal with OSAP. So when it comes to restructuring, OSAP does get some special privileges. And what that is if you have a student loan and it's been less than 7 years since you left school. So by leaving school, I mean you graduated or you just left, you dropped out. If it's been less than 7 years since you left school, that loan is indestructible. You can't get rid of it through a bankruptcy or through a proposal. If you let's say graduated in 2020 and you go bankrupt or you do a proposal, your other creditors will eventually be discharged, will disappear. But OSAP's going to go, nope, you still owe me, and they're right. They're right. You're stuck with it. Okay. Now there's an exception to that, which I'll get into in a second. But why does this matter? Well, we do get questions all the time. What can I do with my student loan? The first thing I think people need to know, though, is obviously if you do have debts, and among those debts is a student loan, and it's been 7 years or more since you graduated, hey, terrific. Or since you left school, you're in luck. We can do something with that. It's treated as an ordinary debt. And barring any problems with fraud or anything like that, you can get off the hook and we can put together a really great plan for you. Now, that doesn't preclude you from getting help if it's been less than 7 years since you left school. I get calls all the time, hey, can you help me? I've got a student loan and other debts. And I'll say, well, when did you graduate? Oh, it's been less than 7 years. I guess you can't help me. It's like, no, I can still help. In that case, it really depends on the mix of debt. So if let's say someone owes $40,000, credit cards, loans, lines of credit, etc., and $10,000 of that is a student loan and it's been less than 7 years since they left school. Well, you know what? We can't get rid of that student loan, but we can still restructure the other 30. That to me is still beneficial. That person can really change their life. It'll help them with the monthly payments, and now on top of that, especially if they're able to pay OSAP separately from, say, their proposal. The student loan debts tend to have fairly reasonable terms as long as you haven't fallen into arrears and gone to collections or anything like that. So often the person is much better off, and of course it's better than doing nothing, and you're saddled with $40,000 of debt. Where we do run into challenges, of course, is if, let's take the $40,000 example again and now reverse it. They owe $30,000 on a student loan that's only a couple of years old, or a couple of years since they left school, and they only have $10,000 of, shall we say, normal debt. And that really sucks, because the challenge, of course, is we have to include that student loan in the bankruptcy or the proposal. Now, most people say, well, why don't you just leave it out? Well, there's two challenges with that. One is you can't. It's unsecured debt. It has to be listed. The other is if you do try to leave it out, because I know someone in the industry is going to watch this, and they're going to say, no, you can just leave it out. No, you can't. I know, because in the early days I tried, and we were successful up until about 2013. What we would do is we would list, whenever we had these lopsided arrangements where the OSAP debt was gargantuan and the regular debt was, relative to the OSAP small, we would list the OSAP for $1, and it worked beautifully until OSAP started filing claims, and then it just completely threw everything out of whack. And it's like, well, we got to list it. We have no choice. So you can't just not list it. Now, it doesn't necessarily interrupt the debt because it's indestructible. You're still stuck either paying it or applying for interest relief or some combination of both. But of course, it stinks because you only have $10,000 of dischargeable debt, but we have to base the proposal on the $40,000. So in a situation like that, I'll often try to lowball the best I can. But before doing that, I'll always have a long and in-depth discussion with the potential client, because I want them to understand, look, we're in a situation here where you really, it's the 10,000 that's ultimately harming you, but we have to call this 40. And the question then is, what's the mix of debt again? I did have a client a number of years ago. I still recall his numbers. He owed $15,000 on credit cards and payday loans. He had the money market, cash money, paid today loans, and those were just destroying him. It was about $15,000, but he had about $25,000 in a student loan that he couldn't get rid of. It had only been about 5 years since he graduated. And I said to him, well, look, one option is you can wait 2 years, but I mean, these things are eating. And he just said, no way. He said, I got to get rid of these payday loans. They're just killing me. And he understood that we'd have to bid again on $40,000, but he said, you know what, it's worth it just to get rid of the other debt. And it did work out. He didn't get the deal of the century, but compared to where he was paying much less per month. Rebuilt credit, ultimately dealt with the student loan. So that to me is still a good thing. Now, I mentioned there's an exception to the rule. There is. If you go through the BIA, the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act, you'll see that there is a section that gives an exception to this rule. And it goes, in layman's language, it goes something like this. If you file a proposal or a bankruptcy, and the day you file, it's been less than 7 years since you left school, and thus your student loan is not dischargeable. If you get discharged from your bankruptcy or your proposal, in other words, you successfully complete the proposal and you get discharged from bankruptcy, and now 5 years have passed, you've reached the 5-year mark, you can actually go to court. Now, you have to hire a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. Okay, you have to hire a lawyer, but that lawyer will go to court for you and pretty much do one of these. Okay, he's going to play the violin, and that's a violin. I don't know if you can tell. He's going to play the violin in front of the judge, and the lawyer's going to have to show really 2.5 things. Okay, the first thing it's going to have to be demonstrated. Well, the first thing, actually, let me back up. First thing that has to happen is OSAP has to show up to the court. Sometimes they don't, in which case, congratulations. It's like fighting a speeding ticket and the cop doesn't show up. Never happens to me, mind you. But in that case, OSAP, National Student Loans, would have to show up. Given everything that's happened over the last 2.5 years with the virus nonsense, you might get lucky. If OSAP does show up, though, the lawyer's going to have to demonstrate, first of all, that you acted in good faith. So the first question is, did the debtor act in good faith? What does that mean? What it really means is, when you got your OSAP loan, did you take that loan and put it towards school and tuition and books and accommodations and so forth? Or did you take the loans and go to the track? Or did you take the loan and put it towards a mortgage, which is also known as fraud? Don't do that. It's a bad idea. So did you act in good faith? Most people, yes, they went to school. They acted in good faith. Maybe they used some of the money for alcohol and other things, but ultimately you went to school. The second question is kind of a double question. The second is, will this be a continued hardship on the debtor? Now, that's in the judge's discretion. What's a continued hardship? Well, they're going to look at how much you still owe, how much you're earning, what are your circumstances. Are you the cause of your circumstances, or are you a victim of circumstance? That's a judgment call, thus the judge. But they're also going to look at, it seems to me, it's not written explicitly in the law, but they also will look at, are you benefiting from your education? What did you study versus what you're doing? Did you study to be a dental hygienist, but you're working in a tire factory? I mean, something like that. So they will look at that and consider it. They also look at what you study, just because this is one of those times where it's actually a good thing to have studied 14th century French poetry, because you'll never find a job for that unless you're a professor. And no one can really say you're benefiting from your education. However, if you studied petroleum engineering, there's a good chance the judge is going to look at you and say, what's the problem? Go get a job for 180 grand a year. No, I'm just speculating, but it does come into play. The more specialized the education, especially if it's in a field that is known to, provide jobs that offer high income, the tougher it is to claim that this will be a continued hardship. So, but ultimately it's in the judge's discretion and it can get thrown out. Now that's a leap of faith, obviously. You don't know what's going to happen. So whenever I'm dealing with someone who has a student loan and it's been less than 7 years since they graduated, and they're not a few months away, they're a few years away from hitting the 7-year mark, I will discuss with them all the implications. And ultimately, the math always wins. What we look at is, by doing a proposal, will this put someone in a considerably better situation? And often it does, but we have to look at that. So I always tell people, we get a lot of referrals from financial advisors, and I always tell them, if you're dealing with someone who has a student loan and it's been less than 7 years, give us a call. We'll go over the numbers. We'll try to figure out what makes sense, what's possible, because ultimately we want to make someone's life better, not worse. So again, student loans, you have that 7-year rule in order to discharge the debts. However, if it's been less than 7 years and the debt is not dischargeable, it doesn't mean you're sunk. We have to look at the big picture, how much debt is owed in total, and what will the end result be if we can accomplish what we want to accomplish. Hope that helps.